Welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Panviva. It's entitled Managing Customer Expectations in a Complex Environment. Over the next hour, with the help of today's special guests, Danielle Graham, Group General Manager Stella, and Cameron Geeson, Group General Manager Inbound Sales Origin Energy, we hope to have you totally engrossed in the conversation as well as spark your interest, and of course there will be a Q&A at the end of the session. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping. Remember, it's important to interact to maximise the benefit, and as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the slides and recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the questions pane on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Danielle, Cameron or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're having a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type the questions so you don't forget them as we go along. I know many of you are familiar with asking questions, but we always need to try out the questions pane on the control panel, just in case. And the question for today is, and it's a really trick question, what is the date of the traditional end of the Australian tax year? And you probably hear terms on the TV set like EOFY if you're about to buy a car, but there's a special date associated with it. Melissa and Cassie have got it right. Well done, ladies. What about everybody else? We've got quite a few people already logged in. Woohoo, thanks for the smiley face, Cassie. Lois has got it, Jason's got it. Who else knows the right date? Yeah, Annie's got it. Deborah's got it. Oh, no, different date, no. Nicole's got it. Okay, so I think we all know how to use that. Thanks, John, as well. Well done. Okay, so the date is actually the 30th of June. That's the traditional Australian taxation year end. So some more housekeeping. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can click to switch to the telephone. A toll-free number for your country, the access code and the PIN will appear on the screen for you to dial in the normal way. Or you can raise your virtual hand and someone from the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. So before we really get into deeply, let me take the opportunity to introduce our two guests that will discuss the topic of customer expectations in a complex environment. Danielle Graham, Group General Manager, Stella. Danielle is obsessively fascinated by people, continuously learning new things and problem solving. These combined passions have led her to spend the last 25 plus years leading teams across service and sales within Telstra, Census, Aegis, Australia Post and Origin Energy, and is currently at Stella managing their government's outsourced contracts with a 700 plus team and 4 sites. Because she loves learning so much, both formal and informal, she started a Bachelor of Business, specialising in marketing, and then completed a Master's Management, which she then supplemented more recently with a postgraduate diploma in psychological science. I think Danielle's a bit busy. Then our second guest speaker today is Cameron Geeson, Group General Manager, Inbound Sales at Origin Energy. Cameron has worked across the financial services and energy for more than 16 years. He has extensive knowledge of the retail and business banking business, and for the last 2 years has been in his current role, looking after 4 million customers through his 4 call centres in Australia. Cameron has an intimate knowledge of the changing landscape businesses are facing and is on the journey of changing Origin to future-proof the way it works with customers. I'm so pleased to welcome both Danielle and Cameron to the webinar today. So we're going to get you guys to do a little bit of work now, and Dimple is going to launch a poll. So hands on keyboards. The question is omni-channel on your radar? So the answers that you can select from: yes, no, not sure, or unsure, or we've already got it. So guys, if you want to start answering, my goodness, you guys are quick off on the keyboard. I like this to see. So we've got about 70% of the attendees having answered the question. So you can just give it a couple of seconds and then we'll get a really good sense for both Danielle and Cameron in terms of where we need to talk about the topic. Okay, Dimple, can you close the poll and let's share the outcomes. So we've got 58% saying omni-channel's on the radar, 10% no, 25% unsure, and 8% already have it. So that really gives us some great positioning in terms of where we are with omni-channel with our audience today. So the first thing we're going to do is a little bit of scene setting. So Dimple, if you can move us on to the next slide, that would be great. We're going to take a helicopter view, as I was saying, before we wade in with Cameron and Danielle. Let's face it, omni-channel has been part of our lexicon for almost a decade, which I find really hard to believe. So why are we still talking about it? I guess probably the best way to start looking at it is through the lens of some benchmarking and then through the eyes of a couple of fabulous practitioners that live and breathe this every day. We know from the 2017 Data Global Customer Experience Benchmarking Report that globally only 8% of organisations have all channels connected, and then another 22% have some connected. 58% of those channels are managed in silos, and 42% of channel data is not actively shared between teams. So what does that tell us about the experience we're setting up for our respective customers? And then of course there's the complexity of your people potentially working across multiple channels. Can this be done, and should it? Contact centres are now faced with increased complexity, and that's not news to all of you on this webinar, as a consequence of the market moving towards an omni-channel environment. We're going to explore now with Danielle and Cameron the complexity that it's had on their organisation and workforce and how they've addressed some of these concerns. So firstly, Cameron, welcome again, and it's over to you to share with us the Origin Energy perspective.
Thanks, Fiona. I suppose when we look at omni-channel from an Origin perspective, we're really thinking about a problem statement that starts with first point resolution for customers. And, you know, probably most of the verbatim feedback we get, you know, for those that use the NPS customer sat model, you know, most of the detractors were people that weren't able to fulfill their initial transaction at through their channel of choice, be that internet or over the phone. And so really for us, it's the omni-channel journey for us really is around how do we actually help a customer resolve their query at first point. So, you know, if they're on our internet page, you know, how do we get on with web chat and actually help them fulfill that order online? If they're calling through, how do we make sure that we execute first time, every time? And even things like out in the field from a SME perspective, how do we use iPads out in the field to actually have customer-facing agents being able to read terms and conditions, have people sign up and execute and close it out right on the spot? So for us, it's sort of taking on a few dimensions. And I suppose that's sort of all stem from that first point resolution piece. The other thing which from our perspective was really pointed in our engagement feedback is that staff want more variation. And Fiona, you mentioned before around, people working across multiple channels. Can this be done, and should it be done? Based on what I see and what I hear from my team is that they actually want it to be done. If you're in a contact centre role, and for someone like myself who a very long time ago started out in the Commonwealth Bank as a call centre agent, 40 hours a week on the phone for a long period of time can be quite draining. And we look for things like competitions, etc., to really try and change and energise the role. But in actual fact, what our staff are telling us is they actually want to be trained in not only just more products and more areas and adjacent parts of the business, but actually in a way that they can interact with customers where they're not just doing the same thing day in, day out. So for us, it's actually had a really good kick for our engagement score as we've implemented things like web chat. And as well as that, we've had to sort of implement a more dynamic KM or knowledge management program, which we've implemented over the last 18 months to help us be able to manage the different channels across the roles. So hopefully that gives you a bit of insight on the Origin journey so far.
Thanks, Cameron. Danielle, can we hear about Stella?
Absolutely. So I think in one of our key government contracts, we work across web chat, social media, and telephony as well. And I think the key challenge around that is customers have the expectation of the conversation flowing regardless of medium and if those changes, and how do you do the handoffs in a clean way that customers don't feel like they're repeating themselves. I think that's always a key challenge. I think that it puts different dynamics into the agent skill set, not just in a written skills, but also in that managing that complexity across different mediums. And absolutely, our agents also love the diversity as well, but it does require different thought in how to respond in today's age, particularly on web chat or social media, when you know that your answer can then be shared much more broadly outside of just the actual individual interaction. And I think what we're seeing is our customers are just continually expecting that all technology options are available all of the time. So it's really trying to keep pace with that expectation, but also to be able to deliver that in a way that's sustainable for the business.
Thanks, Danielle. I mean, and there were a couple of really common points that both you and Cameron have discussed around that variety is important, customer driven, and really ensuring that you have the ability to deliver on those expectations, both from your people perspective and your customers perspective. So let's ask another question of our attendees. So Dimple, if you could please launch the second poll. And the question is what's getting in your way of implementing omni-channel? Is it fear of change, cost, lack of knowledge, time, or I'm not really sure about what's going on? So Cameron, while we're just getting everyone to vote, when Origin was first exploring this, and I know I'm putting you on the spot because this is a question that we hadn't set up, what was Origin's perspective on it initially? Was that can't do it, this is too big? Just give us a real high helicopter view of when it was initially raised internally, if you're able to.
Probably the first fear is the cost. And then, Danielle mentioned social media. That we all know what happens when a post goes viral from a company these days. So probably the fear of exposure and the fear of cost. But I think also a genuine excitement when you start sharing the knowledge and your thoughts around omni-channel with your team and the opportunity to grow. You start to realise pretty quickly that your teams are really asking for this and really wanting this to help them grow. So I think that the first two that I mentioned were probably really the fears for us going into it. But because I think from a cost perspective, you're always going to have to outlay costs, whether it be on systems or KM or some change to an operating or a CRM. So I think they were probably the two key things that sort of we had to work through as we started our journey.
Fantastic. I'm not going to ask you the same question, Danielle, because we're going to share the results of the poll. So there you go. Fear of change, not getting in the way. We people in the industry are fearless and fierce. I can see that. So cost was 14%, lack of knowledge 29%. Well, hopefully this webinar is going to address that. Time and unsure of the reason why. So there's some opportunities certainly from our subject matter experts, Danielle and Cameron, to take us through this. So we're now going to talk about customer satisfaction. And Danielle, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, one at a time, because I don't expect you to remember all 3 of them. Has there been any change in customer expectations?
Absolutely. I think customers, as soon as they are using a technology for themselves, their expectation is that they're able to interact with organisations on that same technology. And I think, we've really seen a rise, for example, in the messenger apps that that's something now that's so large scale at a consumer level between consumers, but now there is an expectation of why can't I just send a message through Messenger as opposed to having to call or directly email an organisation. So I think that really, in a way, organisations are always sort of struggling a little bit to keep pace with the adoption rates that our consumers have in embracing new technologies.
Okay, so has there been any customer resistance to change?
Absolutely. I think, we still have our client base who really, are not interested in embracing new technologies, and particularly in, some of our clients that we work with who are trying to go down a cost minimisation path, they are driving more and more of their customers online, or trying to, for the more simple transactions rather than having to pay someone to do that. And I think, we do definitely have clients who are resisting that, or consumers who are resisting that. So it's definitely, that's why I think, you've got to provide all levels of service to be able to maximise your delivery to the widest range of your client base. But I think there is also a place for support and education in helping your clients move along that technology journey, as you also try and keep pace with those who are the fast adopters.
Good point. So did you need to introduce any new measurements or change in focus?
Absolutely, particularly around the social and web chat space, it's a really different organisational dynamic. When you have large teams working in that space, it really moves away from the traditional customer service and sales models of that energy, buzz environment, when you've got a whole heap of staff who are actually working quite silently, and you can just really hear more the tapping of keyboards. And so then it becomes around, how do you replicate some of the culture that you may have had previous in your organisation that really fed off that energy and maximised that energy, whereas now in a different sort of quieter environment, how do you then actually create and generate energy when people are working sort of more quietly? I think also there's the continuum in that a lot of the easy answers now are available online. So what that's done to agents is really increase the continual complexity in the workload that they deal with. They don't get too many sort of basic, straightforward questions that break up their day anymore. Their workload does consist more of sort of more complex, more in-depth type questions that then require sort of that more ongoing, deeper thinking during the day as well. So it's then about how do you support your agents and provide resilience training and support, but also outlets to make sure that they've got balance in their day and it's not so intense all the time.
Mm-hmm. Cameron, have you got a different perspective or something that you'd like to add, especially from a sales perspective?
I probably would just echo Danielle's thoughts, but the only thing I'd really add would be around the early adopters. Like for companies that aren't on web chat, social media already and talking to customers on a daily basis, you're actually missing a huge opportunity to interact with your customers. We talked about before around customers having an opportunity to interact through their channel of choice. And not having, if they can't complete a sale, for example, or an interaction online and that's their channel of choice, and you don't have a web chat system to be able to help them through it. A lot of customers that are particularly the early adopters will choose to go to another company rather than pursue that company through a different channel. So I think from my perspective, that's probably one thing that we were really conscious of with our journey. And then from an agent, probably around the measurements and change in focus. As when you go into new mediums, there is a lot of ambiguity around, you know, particularly in a sales environment, you know, what do targets look like when you've got an agent who maybe spends, you know, 4 hours on the phone in a traditional sales role, and you know what their AHT should be, you know roughly what their after call work should be, you know how many sales they should be hitting, what their conversion rate should look like. You then for the afternoon potentially flip them over to web chat. And at the start, it's very hard to understand how long should that chat take in terms of success. What does it actually look like? Should you be closing sales through a different medium in a different department? For example, if, you know, if those sales go to the online team, if they're completed there, how do you reward the agent for that? But they're all things that you can work through, and I think if you take an approach to breaking down the silos, because you know the cross-channel piece can really get in the way of omni-channel if you don't have a team that work really well together at a senior level. So that's all I'd probably add to Danielle's points.
Thanks, Cameron. So we're going to switch views right now, and we're going to talk about agent capabilities. And Cameron, you're going to kick off on this one. So here's a couple of questions, and I'll ask them one at a time. And this is probably very obvious. Did you need to retrain your team members?
Absolutely. And, you know, I mean, probably, particularly for us, you know, it's quite easy to a certain extent to talk to a customer over the phone. But you know, for anybody that's worked in a sales organisation, and you'll hear somebody talk on the phone, and then you'll read what they've put in the customer notes, and you see the spelling errors, you see the lack of punctuation and grammar, all of which in a social media sense are extremely important. You put that in a web chat, if you put the wrong word in, or you pronounce, you know, if you say something incorrectly, or I don't know how many times I've seen lose spelt with double O, which is frustrating. So there's certainly an aspect to the way you key together your sentences in a written way that you've absolutely got to focus in on with your agents to make sure that you protect yourself from some of those risks in the business.
Yeah, and commas importantly change the whole context of a
Absolutely.
conversation. Take a breath. Okay, next question. Did you have to introduce new tool sets and connect sources of information?
We did, and we sort of coincided with going live with a new knowledge management system called Knowledge Hub. Obviously you're aware of it, but you need something. You know, in the past we had just basically business process documents. Probably Danielle might remember them from the Origin days, the old BPPs, but and they were very much structured around follow your nose. So you just took, you know, customer calls in to move house. You go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. This is what you have to say, and it's very, very structured. If you just jumped off a call and you get a web chat pop up on your screen, you need to have the ability to be able to have a knowledge management system that can help you source different ways of dealing with different issues, because you're dealing with different systems. We might use an SAP CRM for us internally, but you know the customer's dealing with a digital web form, which looks and feels completely different, and will have a different layout, and therefore you need a different set of KM instructions or knowledge management instructions to be able to work through it. So you need a tool that's sort of a little bit more intuitive and helps the agent sort of work through whatever particular customer issue they have in front of them.
Okay. What did you need to do, or did you do anything to empower your agents and drive their performance?
Not too much, not too dissimilar to what we would normally do. I think you know, Danielle mentioned before around the quietness of an area where if you're on a call center floor, it's buzzing, it's loud. You know, you would have heard that, you know, earlier before. I've had to move around a couple of times to get a quiet spot, but you know, I think for me, it's how do you keep that energy going when, you know, people are really tuned into thinking about what they're typing, and they're not listening to a call, they're waiting for a customer to respond. You know, they might be running 3 or 4 chats at a time. You know, I think you can, agents can sometimes sit back with a new opportunity and be a little bit fearful of the change. So it's just making sure that, you know what, if you spell something wrong, if you get something wrong with a web chat, if a social media post does go viral and we know that your intent was right, you know, these sorts of things, you've really got to make sure that the agents know that you've got their back, and that you're training them properly. Because if you do that right, then they feel empowered to make calls and get things right for the customer and use their common sense. So I think that's important.
Cool. Danielle, your thoughts on what Cameron's just shared?
Yeah, I think, you know, additional to that, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about tone of voice, and look, you know, I know that's really sort of 101 in, you know, doing that type of work, but it's that real balance, because what agents see out in social media is, you know, some of the ones that do go viral for a good reason are because they're warm and funny and entertaining, and so sometimes our agents think that that's the way to success, but it's really about making sure that that tone of voice is actually aligned to your organisation and what you're looking for, and it's not just about popularity votes in a social space, that actually it's about being, you know, true to the ethos of the organisation. So we've sort of also spent time on, you know, working through that, but also in written communication, as we all know, just in human interaction, you know, one of the challenges is nuance and being able to pick up sometimes on, you know, requests that may not be fully spelt out, and how do you actually dig a bit deeper. And often on a phone you can pick that up through the tone or emotion you're hearing with a customer, whereas online you've got that flatness, so you actually may need to ask sort of more probing questions, or questions that include an element of emotion, so that you can actually get a gauge more fully of where the customer is at and what sort of solution they're looking for.
Fantastic. And you know, that emotional intelligence, irrespective of whether it's voice or online, is incredibly important in terms of creating that connection with your customer. Okay, so we're going to ask a couple of questions. So I'm going to say hands on keyboards, everybody. So Dimple, if you could launch the poll. And the question is, will your current knowledge management processes support you through an omni-channel transition? Yes, no, unsure, we don't have knowledge management. Danielle, can you talk about this in particular within Stella's remit?
Absolutely. I think one of the fundamental shifts in what we had talked about before, with more and more sort of easy calls being done now, self-service, what that really does put the onus on is that, you know, in all of my time in industry, you know, we've always said we don't expect the agents to know everything. But there was still a belief, or you know, certainly agents relied on, you know, a really solid base of their own knowledge. The reality is now is that information is just changing at such a rate that we're just continually reminding our agents that they just can't necessarily rely on that traditional knowledge base. Instead, what they need to rely on is their searching skills through our knowledge management base, because we don't expect them to remember everything, and information is so dynamic and there are so many changes. Again, we don't expect them to be able to make sure that they keep track of all of those changes and remember them all. Instead, we expect them to really know how to navigate the knowledge management system. And that really should take the pressure off in terms of feeling that you have so much that you need to continually understand and maintain in your knowledge. And what did you miss when you were on holidays, or what did you miss if you were off sick? And you get a call and someone asks something and you're like, oh, has something changed in the last couple of days that I'm not aware of or I haven't seen? And so really we have encouraged our agents to have faith and to put that trust into our knowledge management system, rather than us having that faith and trust put on their shoulders and expecting them to fully remember everything, because I just think in today's world it's becoming less and less possible given the speed and velocity of change.
Thanks. We're going to close the poll and share the outcome. 37% of you said that your current knowledge management processes will support you through the transition, 29% no, 18% unsure, and 60% we don't have knowledge management. Cameron, I just want to ask you, were there any lessons that you learned in that transition? Did you have to change your processes to support omni-channel?
Oh, absolutely. I think to Danielle's point around people being memory dependent, I mean, particularly when you're, like in an environment where you're moving customers' houses, you're playing with electricity or you're playing with gas. It was always sort of the way that the most tenured agents tend to have the highest customer sat scores, and because they knew everything and they could solve a problem. But it was also, when things changed, the quickest way for things to go bad. So you really need to make sure that you've got a KM sort of process or a system that actually allows agents not to be memory dependent around knowledge management and process and procedure. And particularly too in a sales environment, you want your people more to be focused on your sales methodology and be relying on the system functioning well and pushing out updates and pieces of information they need to know, so that they don't have to be memory dependent, because in my view, memory dependency is probably one of the quickest ways from a process perspective for things to go wrong.
You're very right. Let's just ask another question, because we can, and we want to just get some additional comments from both Cameron and Danielle. So what areas do you need to focus on to effectively manage an omni-channel environment? Is it formal knowledge management, introducing new tools for your people? Is it their capability, all of the above, or you're really uncertain? Cameron, I'm going to throw to you first. Was there any one of these things that actually stood out for you at Origin that you needed to focus on?
Probably all of the above. You've got to. You can't. If you focus just on one, you'll land one thing maybe really well, but the other two will just bring you undone. You've got to get your agents accustomed to trying different tools, different platforms of social media, different web chat providers. We're going through a process around that now. We're on our third one, and from a knowledge management perspective, going from maybe where things probably didn't change or that frequently, or just sort of pick it up, to actually being able to specify what the update is and for them to be able to read it sort of exclusively of the old sort of processes is really, really important. So for me, I would have answered that question with all of the above, because I think you've got to work on all three at the same time to be able to make sure that you get it right.
Thank you. And Danielle, your thoughts while we get the responses shared?
Yeah, I agree. It is all of the above, but I think one of the challenges is probably sometimes I think you launch a knowledge management tool and you think that that's it. It's sort of done. Whereas I would say that it's not done. It's as dynamic and needs to be as dynamic as the rest of your business, because the way that you're processing information, the way that your agents are processing that information, needs to just continually adapt and ensure that it's keeping pace with the other changes that are going on in your organisation. And I think that's a real challenge, because I think it can move into a BAU mentality of just updates, revised information, as opposed to delivery mechanism. Are you optimizing the way that you're providing it to people? Are there better ways of delivering that? Are there better ways of representing information to get greater effectiveness in either how you measure quality or customer satisfaction or first call resolution? And I think there's a real performance link between how you're utilizing that tool and making sure that it's keeping pace with the sort of expectations that you have from your agents as well.
Thank you. some really good points there from both Cameron and Danielle. So we're going to now move on to the questions that you guys have been asking, and it's really good. We've got quite a list of questions to work through. So even while we're asking the questions and getting Cameron and Danielle to answer the questions, if you think of anything, keep typing them in, because we have time to explore other aspects. So Melissa has asked, and I don't know who we're going to throw this to first, so jump right in. How much has RPA and AI played a part, oh, it's for you, Cameron, in the origin journey? There you go, directed at you. Have we still got Cameron? No, he's disappeared. All right, what we might then do... Oh, you're on mute. I do that all the time.
Have you got me?
I have got you back. Welcome back.
Apologies.
So did you hear that question?
Sorry. Hang on 1 second. I'm having a little bit of trouble here with my headset. Hang on.
You haven't got headset here, have you, Cameron? Surely not.
No. Okay.
What we might do while you work on your headset, I'll throw another question out there and we'll get Danielle to answer it. And this is also from Melissa. Melissa wants to know whether omni-channel changed how the agents were trained or upskilled.
Yeah, it does. And I think sometimes we've got to be really careful that we can overplay the complexity of the delivery channel. So I think sometimes you can actually scare your agents about the differences required from different delivery mechanisms, and at the end of the day, they're still, relying on their core competency. So we really try and make sure that, absolutely it's exciting and it's a different way of doing things by working in different channels, but don't let that overall what actually the primary reason of your role is or primary function of your role is. And it's really important not to lose sight of that because the delivery channel will not compensate for poor service or poor knowledge or poor communication skills of an agent. So we really try and make sure that that level of excitement doesn't overawe actual performance.
Thank you. Cameron, do you have any comments on that about whether the training or upskilling changed because of omni-channel?
Sorry, I missed all of that. I've just changed headsets, so I completely missed all of that after a question. So sorry.
That's right. So we were just asking whether omni-channel actually changed how your agents were trained or upskilled.
Oh, good question. Well, it did in terms of the types of roles, but I guess in terms of our inductions, etc., it probably put more in you. You've got to try and work through what you can take out, and probably going back to the AI and RPA sort of question. It puts pressure on you to really take out all the unnecessary stuff and what you can, Autobot and all that sort of stuff. And you start to really see what is possible. So I've been on a little bit of a journey around that. We're scratching the surface, if I'm fair. We're not anywhere near through where I'd like to be, just to go back to that original question. Yep. I think it'll play a huge part in the future for us, particularly as you get more into probably agents using the same digital form as what your customers use. Probably, different URLs, etc., with different things in there. But, you're going to need to really work on that, the RPA stuff for us as we move forward. And then, like I said, from a training perspective, if I'm fair, it probably didn't really change too much. We're on a journey at the moment for now to shift a lot of our training again, more in a digital sort of way, yeah. So does that kind of answer the question? Sorry, I'm a bit confusing with all the headset issues. So I'm back on now.
That's fine. Yeah, you're back with us. That's the important thing, because we didn't want to lose your expertise. And Melissa has answered and said yes, thank you. I'm going to throw to Danielle with another question, and this is from Paul. Paul wants to know, how do you independently measure the success of the agent and omni-channel?
I'm trying to think what you, so in terms of performance, agent
Yes.
performance, Fiona?
Yeah, the success, yeah.
Yeah, so we have, we've got, pretty complex sort of tracking set up. So we're able to track an agent's conversation rate. So, how many chats are they able to maintain at the one time? And our web chat agents are targeted on that. Our social media team are targeted again on also on sort of the number of posts that they're able to complete within a time frame. But we also then have really stringent quality metrics as well. So a web chat conversation is assessed very similarly from our QAs as it would be from a call. So they follow the whole flow of web chat to apply the same quality metrics. So we don't see it as standing independently. We see it, able to be measured in very similar ways as what we measure traditional telephony and other sort of forms. I don't think that we do anything particularly special. It's just probably more what you're measuring, and our technologies that we use are able to deliver those stats so that we can benchmark. The upside to working in an outsourced environment is that we have a range of clients that are managed by our business, and so we've got some pretty good benchmarks of what's possible in different parts of different industries. So that helps us know what we should be aiming for.
And thanks, Danielle. And Cameron, anything that you'd like to add there?
Not particularly. Only apart from sort of productivity measures, which are really critical as you're going through the start to really understand what you should be measuring. But from a sales perspective, really looking at outcomes and what they're closing off in a web chat sense at first point from a customer sat and sales perspective. So we're starting to get a better idea of what we should be converting those at and starting to build those out. But sounds like I might need to catch up for a coffee with Danielle to work through a little bit more with her as well.
Any excuse for a coffee in Melbourne? I think that's what it is, Cameron.
Yeah,
okay.
This is true.
You don't need an excuse. So Katini would like to know how and who maintains the information on the knowledge management database. Maybe can we start with you?
Yeah, we've got a whole KM team. So Matty Clark, who's giving a thumbs up over by his desk, who's listening in, he runs our KM team. And we have a group under him that work on constantly updating across my inbound sales team, our customer services team, solar. So that sort of forms part of our customer care team. But the beauty of it, I suppose, that team for us is that you're constantly sort of working with those guys on updating and getting things in. So we have a whole separate area that works on that for us at Origin.
Right. And Danielle?
Yeah, we have the same. We have dedicated teams that work on that, and particularly, I think, one of the things that I love in my role, some of the reporting that we're able to get out of our knowledge management tools. So, we can look at page impressions, and then we can have a look at, in particular, we line those up against our quality results, so we can see, okay, we're having a particular challenge in this space in our quality metrics at a broad level, and then we look at the associated pages and see what the page impressions are trending like, and whether or not people are potentially looking at the wrong page. Are they not finding what they're looking for? So we really look at it from a dual point of view, not just in terms of the knowledge management content, but also its actual performance, and really we make sure that we hold it accountable as well as an effective tool to make sure that it's delivering what our agents need.
Thank you. Now we've got a very cheeky question from John. And the question is, what's key when determining which knowledge management tool to go with? Cameron, do you want to take that first?
Uh,
It's tricky.
what's key? One that improves your agent and customer experience, and you got to have a good group of people you can work with, particularly when you want to be able to adapt and make changes and build things. You got to have a very flexible team externally that you can work with to make those changes and constantly look at ways to improve it and build it out.
And for you, Danielle?
I think it's really around, one of the key things I like about the tool that we use is that the flexibility in how you present the information. And I think, you know, we need to be cognizant that our staff do process information in different ways. So I think it's not just having a script or just one way. So, you know, the way that we represent it is we have the process flows and we actually have it as a process map, and you can click through the process map to get more detail on individual processes. But likewise, you've also got it there as a text guidance as well. And I think that works really well, that it's not just one solution for one type of agent, that really you're providing information in a way that agents can actually self-select to some degree what works for them best. And I think particularly today, you know, most of our agents are used to operating in that environment where they can customise their social media for themselves and customise the information that they see. And so they are looking for, is it just being regimented in one way, or can I also interact with it? And I think also then provide consistent feedback on opportunities that they can see for improvement in the tool. And I think, you know, that works really well for us because we have a lot of feedback on suggestions or questions clarifying, which again just only enhance us to or ensure that we can enhance the tool for our agents. So there's some of the key criteria. And I think then the other thing that I love about the tool that we use is that we also use it to have checkpoints, so we can integrate learning confirmation. So we can issue an update and then we can also issue a quiz to check that people have actually understood that update and sign off that they've actually seen that information and can close it out. And I think that is just a really great way of ensuring, again, that you can measure the effectiveness of that communication. So we've seen ones that we've sent out and we've had an update and we see that the pass rate is not at a normal benchmark, and that's just instant feedback for us that level of communication didn't hit the mark. And so we can turn that around really quickly and update it and reissue it, as opposed to waiting for a fallout from the types of observations that would come from a call. We can actually see really early on that our agents haven't understood it, the information hasn't been clear enough, hasn't provided them what they need. So I actually think, you know, the more that you can build into that sort of instant feedback, rather than waiting for, you know, a problem to really arise further down the pipeline.
Thank you. And we've got
that's really important from a.
in.
I was just going to echo what Danielle said there. That's really important. You know, Origin gets audited by the AER, and one of the things that they look at, particularly around agent conduct risk and missing things from a compliance perspective, and that is really critical, because when you actually pull up and show that agents, A, they read it, the update, and B, they understand it, it really gives comfort when you're going through an audit process, which I had zero consideration of as we went through this journey. I probably should have, but I think that's probably a really important note to add, as how it actually helps you from a risk perspective is really critical.
Yeah, that's a really good add-on there, Cameron. Sarah's got a question as well, and what she'd like you both to do is to share your thoughts on having agents handling concurrent interactions across multiple channels, especially in terms of managing their behaviour and systems. Danielle, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I think we're really just heading down that space at the moment. So we have been running agents sort of more working on, you know, a particular work type at a time, whether it be calls, web chat, or social media. We're now looking at how can we integrate web chat and social media work in a particular team, and have that sort of, you know, come through as a workflow. it is definitely challenging in terms of there are different dynamics at play, and how do you ensure that you've got transparency on all of the actions that are required without corrupting the data. So for example, if you are allowing people to multitask, how do you then really get a clear, accurate view on AHT of one transaction if potentially merging those transactions is automatically impacting the AHT. So for example, if you're chatting on social media and also managing a web chat, and then the web chat conversation is more complicated, how do you actually ensure then that the social media AHT isn't impacted and changes your benchmarks of what actually is expected in that channel or what's possible. So I think we're still very early on in terms of integrating those different types of channels all into one. But I think there's a lot more work in that space to go on, and I think there's absolutely people that will be on the cutting edge of that. We're probably not there yet. We're certainly looking at it and looking at what's next for us in that space, and how to make sure that we don't lose visibility on the key metrics that actually help us plan our business going forward.
Thanks, Danielle. And Cameron?
I'm probably pretty similar to Danielle. There's probably not too much I'd add to that, but other than I think the idea, people have an idea or a concept of being able to multitask, but all I suppose the scientific research suggests that actually being focused on a single task, you're going to execute it better every single time, as opposed to operating on two separate tasks at the same time. And I think for me, that from an efficiency perspective, from a customer satisfaction perspective, I really need to get a better understanding of what that could look like if somebody's really cracking the code on how you get people across, 2 or 3 different mediums. But in my experience, that's probably for us where I'm very clear around it. It's not so much doing. You might do, say, 3 web chats at a time, or you might be on a couple of social medias, which is hard within itself. But then you start switching between social media and web chat, or phone and web chat. For me, it's about having a period of time on a particular task and then moving on to the next task in that different medium, as opposed to at the same time.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. So we've got one, I think we'll have one last question, and people have just been hammering the keyboard and giving us lots of questions. So I thank you all for that. We're not going to get to everybody, unfortunately. But maybe this is a good note to complete today's webinar. And this is a question from Matthew. Matthew would like both of you to give us your opinion on what's exciting you about omni-channel, and what do you see is on the horizon? So Cameron, do you want to go first on this one?
What's exciting me? Probably as a customer, the minimal amount of effort required to complete what I want to complete, and doing it first time, every time. That is really sort of the utopia for us. That's where we want to get to. What excites me, the opportunity that comes with things like video chat. If I think about banking, CBA, for example, have been able to really tighten up their model with their web chat functionality, particularly in their regional locations where they haven't been able to historically get quality people out into, your sort of semi and regional locations, or it's cost them a lot of money to be able to do that. Now they can sort of centralise that team to a certain extent, utilise the web chat and the Skype functionality within their branches, and deliver really highly quality trained. I know we're going through a Royal Commission at the moment, so it might, hearing banking and highly trained in the same sentence might sound a bit funny, but as opposed to sending out, inexperienced or poorly trained or poorly coached people out into regional locations to be able to meet customers' needs. So as that sort of evolves for me, the ability for agents to work from home, and be able to deal with customers on any forum they would like, the ability for us to be able to use those sorts of tools as well as from a decentralised leadership model, I think is really important as well. So there's lots of things that I think we're only really scratching the surface at the moment that I think will excite us over the next sort of couple of years.
Thanks, Cameron and Danielle.
I think one of the things I'm really excited about from a tech point of view is the AI integration and handoffs between, having an AI interface up front and how that then links to your agent. So starting a conversation through an AI and then handing that off to an agent when required based on complexity. I think, that's a really exciting piece, and that has then a flow on again through that piece that I've talked about around really reducing a lot of the simplex, repetitive elements. So I think it's going to make our agents' roles much more interesting. I do think it's going to come with challenges as well, but it's it might be a more intense space, but that's also where I'm more interested is from a people point of view. How do we continually develop our people to be ready to be successful in that environment and really build what's going to be the next level of skills and knowledge that's going to be required in that new world. And I think, we're very much of the view that our contact centres of today will certainly not be where we're operating in the future. And, we're really excited about how do we invest to understand what that's going to be and make sure that we adapt and change to embrace those changes.
Thank you. And I think on that very positive note, let's just start to bring today's webinar to a close. And I want to especially thank Danielle Graham, Group General Manager Stella, and Cameron Geeson, Group General Manager Inbound Sales at Origin Energy, for sharing their stories so openly and your expertise. And then, of course, Panviva, who have enabled us to bring today's session to you. We're very grateful for the thought leadership that Panviva is providing. Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Cameron. Very good and interesting stuff. For those of you that haven't had your questions answered, we will ensure that the questions that we haven't been able to get to today, so that's Marie, Melissa, and Natalie, will get you the answer to those questions, and Sean as well. So let's just come to the final survey, and we have 3 great reasons. You'll get an exit survey unless you've blocked the pop-up, which says you want to either receive the slides and recording, get a call to learn more, and of course, as the answer was previously in the polls, all of the above is really what you might want to do with no obligation. I think it's really important. Or you can contact yourself, Frida Moshe from Panviva, and I'm sure she'd be only too willing to assist you with any of your inquiries. Thanks everyone for your time today. Thank you once again, Danielle and Cameron. And with that, I wish you a very good afternoon or a very good rest of your day, wherever you might be. Thank you.